Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Profitable Christian Business Podcast. I am your host, Doug Greathouse, and I am so pleased to have my friend Andy Bennetts with me today. Andy and I have met a while back. We've become quick friends. We align on so many different things. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, one of his favorite topics, not which is faith. Faith, of course, Jesus. We're going to talk about some Jesus, but that's our number one favorite topic. But our other favorite topic is money, right? And profitable is in the name. Profitable for the kingdom, first of all, but profitable business, right? We want you to be profitable as an individual and have a profitable business. And Andy's going to help with some information towards that. Andy, give us a quick introduction.
Hello, everybody. Yes, thank you so much, Doug, for having me on. I've been looking forward to this. So I'm born and raised in Colorado. I was a teacher for about 10 years. I thought that was, I remember vividly at church camp being called into education, thought that would be my life for the rest of my working career. But God changed course about halfway through there. And I've been in technology sales and consulting the last 15 years. And I'm super excited about my newest venture, which is financial literacy. So back to my roots of education and helping people see a brighter future, get out of debt and build real wealth. So many hats that I've worn throughout the years, but at the core, I am just a dad and a worship leader at the church, and just look forward to sharing some of the fun things that I've been working on and some lessons learned along the way, shall we say.
Wow. I learned something new about you in the introduction. I did not know you were a worship leader.
Yeah, for
nice.
About 10 years. I took over for my dad. So, yep, kind of a fun deal.
Singing instrument. What instruments do you play? Do you sing? Of course,
I sing most. Yeah, that's kind of generally how I do that. I play trumpet, but I'm not as cool as like Phil Driscoll. Way cool. No, Phil Driscoll. I'm not that cool, but yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. I think that's a good lead into my first getting to know you question. If you could instantly master any hobby or skill outside of what you normally do, what would it be and why?
It is perfect lead in because I really have play guitar or play piano. I can kind of hack my way through that, but there's no way that I can actually sing and do both of those. So if I could just snap my fingers and be able to, be just a master at either of those, I don't even care which one it is, but that would help things out immensely. And it would definitely help me to connect with people and be able to kind of share that gift. That'd be pretty awesome.
Nice. I can't wait. I can't wait to get into some of these topics. Like I'm boiling with anticipation, especially talking about debt and how that controls people and how the Bible reflects on debt and all those kind of things. Mm-hmm. So let's bust a money myth that could get us canceled, but it needs to be said. Right. What's one financial belief that Christians really need to rethink?
I think, and I'm going to speak specifically to the folks in America here, because I do have quite a few folks that I either work with or colleagues that are in other countries. So I'm just going to speak to my American fellow Christians. I think the myth that we need to bust and just speak about and talk about is the idea that debt is a normal thing. Debt is just part of life, and we need to be okay with that. That is an absolute lie, I think, from Satan, that we have just been lulled into this reality of like, to do anything, right? I mean, it's gone so quickly from not having debt at all to now we can't buy our couch unless it's on a card. It's like generations we've gone from debt being a negative, evil thing to now it is just a way of life. And I think we have been lulled into this false narrative that is just the way that we need to carry on. And obviously there's some variance in there. So there's some, is it possible to buy a house without going into debt? Probably not. Right. So I'm not saying that all debt is evil and that kind of stuff, but I do think that we have been lulled into this false sense of reality that is just the way that God would have us live our lives.
Ooh, we could go deep. We could go deep there, but we'll circle back to that for sure. What is one money habit that people would definitely judge you for, but you secretly wish they copied?
I am an obsessive budgeter to the point where I had this queued up and ready to go. I have swag of a budgeting app. Like, what kind of a dork has swag? Like that's me. I just think numbers matter. It's a means to an end. I actually posted on Facebook earlier today. People get wrapped up in like, hey, are we earning, obsessed with money, right? That people have some very negative connotations about that. Money is a tool that allows you to accomplish whatever purpose it is that you have. If you have good intentions and you have more money, you can do more good in the world. If you have evil intentions and you have a lot of money, you can do more evil in the world. So I think people demonize having money, and I think that's a little bit askew. So as far as like a habit that I wish people would copy, would be keeping track of your money. One of the rules in YNAB, which is that app that I use, is give every dollar a job, right? If you thought about every time that you got a paycheck, you assigned a job for every single dollar. And some of that might be savings. Again, Christian wise, we give a tenth to Christ before we do anything else, right? But if you assign every dollar a job from the get-go, we roll with the punches. There's a lot of different rules they have right there, but I think that would help all of us to be in a better spot and maybe not get so far into the weeds and into the bondage. If we really, I mean, if we're being honest, of debt. I think debt is a bondage, and we don't call it that way because that's not a fun way to think about it. But that's what the Bible says, and I think that's a true representation of what it is.
Oh, before we go into the fill in blank question, I kind of want to dive in a little bit more on debt, because I've had other people on the podcast and we've talked about debt a little bit,
right?
And this just kind of lets you know where I'm coming from. I think there is, and this may be a debate, and you can help bring me around if you need to.
All right.
There's a term? There's good debt.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts? Is that a falsehood that there's good debt? And if not, why? If so, why?
It is a tricky subject, so I don't want to get canceled too quickly. What, 7 minutes in here? I don't want to have people tune out because of this. I would say maybe let's change the narrative to good and bad. There's a whole story. There's a stallion story. Remind me to tell you that sometime. I'll try to post that later. It's really, really interesting of what is good, what is bad. Anyways, there's that whole thing. So I think good and bad are probably not the right moniker to kind of attach to that. What if we switched it to necessary or like a need or a want, right? You need a place to live. You need a place to live. Whether you rent or whether you own a house, you need a place to live. Do you need that brand new phone? Do you need that brand new car, or do you want it? I think that's a pretty important distinction when we're talking about debt. So that's one aspect that you could look at. The other one is this debt going to lead to something that can, is it an investment, right? I mean, we talk about real estate, that is debt. But if that's something that can then turn into income, then that was what, experts would call good debt.
I love that. And I think really what we're looking at as good debt is usually what you just said. It's an investment, right? Something that you can't necessarily afford right at the moment, but will produce money at the later end. You will recoup your investment. Now, there's a lot of discernment and prayer that probably needs to go around that. And you really need to know what you're doing before you go into any of that, because it is, we just saw the market, right? People invested in the stock and we saw it tank recently. It climbed back up, but you're not in control of a lot of that. So,
right. For what it's worth, again, we could go very deep into this, which I realize we're not going to be here all day. So I'll try to, I have another podcast that I do with my buddy called named Dale, and we call it the Money DNA, Dale and Andy Money DNA podcast. And we had a really interesting episode a couple of weeks ago talking about the birthday cake, right? So what are we basing our, what's our base layer of cake, and then next, and then this kind of stuff. It brought up an interesting point, Doug. You talk about investments. A lot of times when people get their first big boy check, they jump into investments, and that is the foundation that they're trying to build things on. And I would argue that that's probably not, to your idea, the most stable foundation to put things on, right? What is your protection? Are you getting in debt or getting out of debt, right? What is your emergency fund? There's so many other aspects to finances that need to be caught into or taken into consideration, maybe before we just dump every last dollar we have into some type of investment.
Yeah, I'm going to reference another conversation I had recently that we talked about. I think sometimes better than an investment is find another way to make passive income.
Absolutely.
Right. Some of those things require a little bit of investment up front, but some of them don't. They just take a little time and skill.
Right.
Right. So maybe something that you can control a little better is get
Mhm.
into something like that will create another passive income stream. And maybe you're going to talk about some of that. I don't know, but let's talk about the fill in the blank question.
Okay.
This is on every one of our episodes, and I love the answers that I get from this. Faith-based entrepreneurship means blank and requires blank.
Very good. This is something that I would say I'm relatively new into this aspect of entrepreneurship, and just the idea of bringing God into that. And I've been a Christian my entire life, but for whatever reason, and this is not a indictment of my parents or my upbringing, they did a wonderful job. I think it was just my thick skull that it took a while to figure this out. But I would say faith-based entrepreneurship means bringing God into every aspect. I think a lot of times that we leave God at church, right? We leave him at the altar, then we go about our week, and then we pick him back up when we come back to church. And I think that is something that the Holy Spirit's really been working on me, is that God wants you to pray about your business, right? He wants to bless your business. Again, money is not evil, right? If you've got good intentions and you are enabled with those tools, you can do better things in the world. So I think first off is that bringing God into every aspect of your life, business, family, community, outreach, all of that stuff. And then what does that require? This is another difficult thing that depending on where you're at, if you're on a mountaintop or you're on a valley, you need to trust God in every aspect of that. If you're on the mountaintop or if you're in the valley, trust that God will see you through that. I do believe strongly that God will provide. You may not be, wealthy. The whole, what is that? Prosperity, right? The whole prosperity thing. I think that people get that skewed a little bit. I do think that God will provide. I don't know if God guarantees prosperity, but I think that he does say that he will provide for his children.
Thanks for tuning into today's episode.
As a Christian entrepreneur, we want to give you something for free. If you go to clientsforthekingdom.com, we have an ideal client avatar generator on there for free. It's something that we've spent thousands of dollars on, countless hours out, and building out this structure of showing you who your ideal client avatar is and an offer stack that can work for your business.
Enjoy the rest of the episode. Yeah, most of the, well, I'm not going to say most, that's probably not the right word to say, but a lot of the conversations that I've had or dealing with faith and money and relying on God is God sometimes is the 11th hour. Like we sometimes are like, oh, I hope something comes through because there's nothing. I've done everything that I could possibly do to make it happen, and then boom, God shows up and takes care of that bill, or there's money that comes to you that you had no idea was out there, and it covers that bill, and it sometimes it just helps you take the next step forward, and but sometimes he does bless us with more than we expect. But so many conversations that I had is just in the nick of time, just when you've given up, you've done all that you can do, God shows up. So
yeah, and I think maybe sometimes we as fallen humans need that reminder of like where does our source come from? Where does our prosperity come from? It's yes, we're working hard. Yes, God's given us talents to do that. But at the end of the day, every good thing in our life comes from God. Every good thing, right? So let's not get it skewed and make it about us.
I want to go here for a second, just because this popped. I'm letting the Holy Spirit lead.
All right.
So I had some planned questions, but let's talk about obedience in this, right?
Okay.
Because there's there's obedience to God, and God has some rules outlined for how we deal with our finances, right? So I think oftentimes when we get into trouble and we get to that point of I need God to show up, it's because we've had some disobedience in some of the things that we're doing. Just kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree, and it was very interesting. I put a thing out on Facebook the other day of it was something like, what is the number one financial burden or what is the reason that Americans struggle with money is basically the gist of it. And it's been very interesting to hear a wide range of everything from, I love my buddy. I'm sure he was not going to watch this. My college buddy was like government overspending, government conspiracy. You go there, right? And then it was all the way back to overspending or just what's the word? priorities, right? What are your priorities? Are we valuing that brand new car? Is it a status thing or is it a need, right? There's that whole balance of things. So that was a really interesting thing. I'm looking off to the side here of a course that I'm going to teach here in a little bit about biblical foundations of healthy finance. I think it starts with this idea, and we actually already talked about it, right? Understand from the very beginning, God owns everything, right? Your house, money, your job, your family, everything. God owns everything. Start from that position. And then moving forward, what can we learn, right? The Bible says debt is a burden. We're not to be slave to the lender. So get out of debt as quickly as possible. Wise ways to spend money. And again, that idea of if we are not in debt, I think that we can use those tools in a way that God would have us to do that, which is giving generously, giving to whether that's our church or different community things, and then building a legacy that can impact our future generations, right? And again, not leaving them millions of dollars, but how can we do that in a way that will better their lives? What is that setting something up for, like a college foundation for your grandkids or whatever the case is? So again, it's a very, very deep subject. I hope I'm not too far off track there.
No. One of the things that you said in there is I'm not gonna recite the exact verse, and hopefully maybe you can tell me. Leave a wise man leaves. I think it's in Proverbs. A wise man leaves an inheritance to
Yes.
his family, right?
Yep.
So you kind of touched on that a little bit there.
Right. I have a couple scriptures I'm terrible about memorizing, so I will just own up to the fact that it is off to the side here. I'm not reciting these. I need to get better at that. But Proverbs 22:7, the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is slave to the lender. Again, debt is a spiritual and financial bondage that God never intended us to have. So what is the fastest ethical, obviously, way to get out of that debt, right? And then the one in Romans, which I think is similar to the one that you quoted, is let no debt remain outstanding except for continuing the debt to love one another, right? And again, that's not so much on our kids, but the only debt that God wants us to have is the debt of loving God and then loving others the way that he loved us. I think if we can realign our priorities to that, I know that God would honor that.
Yeah. A couple things I want to circle back to. Let's go back all the way back when you talked about budgeting. Was there ever a time when you didn't budget? And can you talk about the transformation point from when you didn't budget to when you did budget?
Absolutely. So my lovely parents were accountants, so numbers was always a thing that we talked about. Oddly enough, though, it was never something. I think they probably showed me how to balance a checkbook, but budget wise is something that I kind of stumbled into after college. Again, my buddy and I had a really interesting conversation about the idea of credit and how the credit industries kind of prey on college kids in America here. You walk into your freshman thing and there's Discover, there's Amex, there's all this kind of stuff. So before I knew what I was doing, I had racked up this credit card with a crazy interest rate, 25, 29%, something like that. So that took a while to dig out. So I think mine was, we always talk about, is it a stick or a carrot? Mine was very much a stick at the beginning. Like I had got into a bad spot between credit card debt, student loan debt, all this kind of stuff. Starting out as a teacher, wasn't making a lot of money. So I had to kind of scrape my way out of the negative spot that I put in. And when I found budgeting as a very, I like order and I like plans. And this was a great way to say, okay, how am I going to give every dollar a job? And how can I, systematically and over time dig my way out of there and then be smarter with that. Let's not ever get back to the spot where we are, having to choose between, groceries or this kind of stuff. I mean, and it was a very short time, but there was a time where that was a pretty rough go. So mine was definitely out of a place of want. And maybe I probably should have brought God into those conversations a little bit sooner, like you'd mentioned.
Yeah. I think that there's one thing I want to talk about on that. But first, the idea in this country, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but as soon as you get into college, it's not just the credit card companies. Most students go into student loan debt at the same time, right?
Yes.
So they're putting you in a condition of debt right out the gate. Right. So you're just accustomed to it. I have my student loan debt. I have my credit card debt. I have all this. You start listing off all your debt. You're not listing, like I for the longest time, I always said this, and it's never going to happen because, well, I'm not going to say never. there needs to be the most important class that someone could probably take in high school if they put it there is a financial education class.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
Generate assets, not debt.
Yep. There you go.
Yeah. So anyway, that's so the one thing I wanted to mention about the whole budgeting thing that always comes to mind is something I talk about a lot is wherever you focus on expands, right? If you like most people aren't focused on their money, right? They're focused on it in a negative aspect. They're not focused on fixing the issue. They're just focused on on being weary about it.
Right. Well, and I think another thing just related to budgeting, but I mean, talk about mindset. I mean, so much of this when it comes to finances, investment, all of this stuff, debt is a mindset. And I think maybe another question that people should be asking themselves rather than can I afford the payment is what is the complete payment right there? Because when I do a thing with mortgages, and it literally feels like a gut punch when people figure out how much they're actually spending in interest. 90% of the time, it is over 100% of what the house is worth, right? I got numbers right here. A $400,000 loan at 6%, you would think 6% of that would be, I don't know, $50,000. Over a 30-year loan is $463,000 in interest alone. That's 115%. And people don't know that, right? And credit cards are just as bad. So this idea of like, stop focusing on what is my monthly payment and figure out what is the total cost of that. And is it really worth going into that amount of debt for whatever it is, the house, the car, the watch, whatever.
Can we talk about this for a minute from a biblical standpoint? One of the things that God talks about a lot is not to covet, right? And a lot of this spending comes because we covet, right? And let's just talk I want to speak to the business owners too, because that's a lot of people that watch this show, is we covet other people's businesses. We covet not just their things, right? We want to get to that level of business. Right. I think so much is about your heart posture. When you're, and are you doing your business to get rich, or are you doing it to serve? Right.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And it is different when you shift away from just personal finance to business finance, but there's definitely some synergy between the two of, hey, this person has X number of employees, or they've got a VA, or look at the brand new company car that they have. Like, is it necessary, or is it a need? Is it a want, or is it and I think if you could, we are so spoiled. We are so spoiled in America, and we get what we want. There's another aspect of this is like having a longer term understanding of things, right? Rather than focusing on the here and the now. What is this doing for me 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? What is this doing for my legacy? Is it really serving where I want to be, or is it just an immediate fix because I want to be as cool as Doug? Doesn't everybody want to be as cool as Doug?
So making the smart decision, not the emotional decision in your business as far as moving forward. That's awesome. So I'm finally going to get to the secret question.
Okay, very good. I got it.
So your secret question, what is the secret to starting your journey towards financial freedom?
I think we're weaving this together very, very nicely here. I think the first one is just realizing that there's a problem and just owning up that, like, I don't have all the answers. I think it honestly breaks my heart. And this is not in a sense of like, oh, well, if, so-and-so doesn't do business with me, that's going to hurt me. It really, at the end of the day, if they have a proven system that's going to help them accomplish their goals, then God bless them and go on your way type deal. But most often when I find people, they don't have a system and they don't have a way to do this. And they have just, again, resolved to the fact that I'm going to live in debt. I'm going to end up paying more for my house in interest than it's worth. And I'm always going to carry credit cards. I'm always, what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, pause for a second. So the secret is understand that you don't know everything, and find somebody that you trust, whether that's me or somebody else. It's really kind of up to you and God, right? But find somebody that you trust and come in with an open mind. I think we live in such a negative and just a what is the right word? Like a mistrusting society. That the second that something feels just a little bit off, or like, oh, that sounds too good to be true, our minds shut off to like, well, that couldn't be that's not possible, right? It sounds too good to be true, so it can't, right? I get that there has been that. I think you probably have been there before, Doug, right? Where you go down an investment route and it ends up burning you. Find people that you trust, find organizations that have been around a long time that have a good track record, and then hear them out. And then if it makes sense, pray about it. I've actually tried to get into the habit before I meet with people is like, we pause, like, let's put this before God. Jesus, if this is something that you want, John and Jane to move forward with me, then let's do that. If not, then give them insight as to how they need to handle their finances in the future, right? If we put everything back to what would God have us do in this situation, and then we allow for the Holy Spirit to kind of move through that, then I think we're going to be in a good spot. Whether you're working with me or somebody else, just trust that and believe that.
Wow. Yes. I'm just sit here for a second. I have some thoughts about that, but I think I might just roll into the next question, and they'll come back to me. So you talk about a financial GPS.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break down how someone can start charting their course today?
You bet. So I love the idea of a GPS. I think it works on so many levels. Just personally, I would get literally lost in a paper sack. So I love the idea of GPS because I'm terrible at directions. My wife can attest to this. So the idea of having a GPS, not only for our traveling, but also for our finances, right? So what does a GPS need? They need, where are you starting from? Where are you going? That's all it needs, right? So it's the same idea with financial GPS. Okay, what is your current state? What are your debts? What is your income? What are your expenses, right? Let's figure out where we're at, right? And then where do you want to go? And then the part that I love about this is that, unlike the bank's plan that takes us on this long, winding road and as long as humanly possible, because the longer you're in debt, let me just give you a little bit of a side note here. If you don't know this, banks want you to stay in debt. Credit cards want you to stay in debt because the longer you're in debt, the more money they get, the bigger buildings they get, the higher salary the CEO gets. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, that is, they are in the business of making money. They're not in the business of being your friend. I realize that there's some very friendly bankers out there, but the reality is they are in a for-profit business, right? So rather than following their plan, because again, their plan does not benefit you, is let's figure out where we start, where do we want to go, and let's find some technology to go as quickly and as mathematically efficiently as possible. So we're not paying all of this extra interest, and we can do this in a fast route. And another GPS alliteration to this is that when life happens, because it will, right? The car's going to break down, or you get a raise, right? You insert that into your GPS, and guess what? It's going to reroute you again to the fastest route possible. Maybe instead of 7.4 years, now you're going to get debt free in 7.1, or when you have to buy that new car, hey, it's only going to go from 7.3 to like 7.8. It only adds 4 months because we're doing this again so efficiently. So that is what I love about the GPS, is it takes all the guesswork out. We're not having to remember to do this stuff. It is just saying, hey, at this point, turn right here, transfer this money, and this is going to be the fastest way to get you out of debt. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. Now it came back to me what I was going to ask her on the previous point, and it kind of relate to this. So I think many people, because there's all the mainstream financial tools, mortgage being one of those.
Yep.
People don't realize there are other options and other ways. Because a lot of people might have heard you at first and it's like, well, if I can't go in debt for my house, right, what do I do? Right. Or there's different ways. Right. And I'm thinking what you'll teach them in that financial GPS is those different routes that they can take that are not the mainstream routes.
Exactly right. I thought it was interesting. I don't know if I can pull it up here, but I have on my screen do you know where the term mortgage came from?
I do, but I don't recall. It was told to me before, but tell me again.
Mort, death, dead, like a pledge. It is a death pledge. Mortgage means a death pledge. That is literally what you're signing on the dotted line. The other one that just bakes people's noodles is that the banks will sell you on the APR. Hey, you got this great rate. We're not getting great rates now, but hopefully you refinanced or bought a new house around COVID time. You're at 4%, 5%, whatever the case is. They sell you on APR. They do not charge you on APR. It actually says in the loan disclosure, this is not your interest rate. Look at it. It will shock you. This is not your interest rate. What they charge you on is the TIP, the total interest percentage, which that is the number that's usually 100% or more. It's nowhere close to your APR. So many tricks, right? That they have fooled us into believing that, again, we're peeling the curtain back and saying, how can we use the bank strategies against them and get you out of debt faster? That's what I'm all about.
Whew, man. Uh, so let's talk on that for a minute. Why do so many people? I mentioned them things being mainstream. And I think that's one of the reasons. Why do so many people unwillingly fall into banking traps that sabotage their wealth?
Good grief. Where do we start? I think it's with I think it starts with education. And again, as a
Mm,
former teacher, which I'm so excited, I have some in-person workshops that I'm going to be doing. I was just literally on a training with a good buddy of mine talking about how to do some awesome virtual events. So I'm really trying to get the word out there, right? So it's all about education. If you don't know, then you can't. Another thing that my buddy Dale says: if you cannot tame what you cannot name,
mm,
right? You cannot tame this beast that is debt and interest rates and all this terrible thing until you name it, right? So let's
mhm,
identify. Here is how they're actually charging you, and if you take their route, it's going to take you a lot longer. We won't even get into the whole idea of refinancing. That is an absolute racket, because the second that you get to the point where you're actually making some headway on your principal, then you refinance and you start all over again. Okay, it is. If you hear, hopefully you're hearing a lot of things that I'm saying,
mm.
but be careful when you're looking at refinancing, because it will end up costing you a lot more in interest than you think that it would. Side note.
Mm,
Um, but again, and I think I mentioned it before, and I literally do. I'm not saying this just to try to make a point. I do have some really good friends that are bankers. There's some good Christian people that are in the banking industry. I'm not trying to demonize the people, but let's be realistic that the industry, the lending industry, whether that's banks or credit cards, they are not in it to help you. They are in it to make a buck, right? They can
mhm.
do that by lending money, and then the other peeling back of the curtain, the second that you lend them money, they are lending that out to other people and making money on your money, which is another banking strategy that people are probably not aware of.
It, you know what makes me like how is sometimes what I come up with is the we've had the government has had to bail out banks before.
Yeah, right.
If they're getting all this money from us and they're misusing it to that extent, that's kind of scary, right? That they have to get bailed out. Not that that's a question. That's just a statement about some banks in general. Like, you
Mhm.
think your money is going, they're going to really allocate your money well, but um, not necessarily. So,
Nope. Nope.
um, man, so many things pop in my mind as you're talking, and I pride myself on being a good listener. So sometimes those thoughts slip my mind.
Nope.
So um, they'll come back in a future part of this interview. So let's just move on.
Okay.
What's the
I'm
biggest mind?
I'm just saying, you need to do a part two. We can definitely
What,
work that out too.
oh, so I really want to start bringing this back around. So I'm glad you said that, because that jogged my mind. What I want to start to do is, I think a lot of what you teach applies to individuals. Can we kind of bring that into a business aspect?
Yeah.
Because um, I love what you said about the end, having an end, like knowing what your end goal is and planning a route there. Business owners get that, right?
Yes.
Well, at least they should.
Right.
They should get that. If you're going to be a good business owner, you should have the end in mind all the time,
Hmm.
and then routing a path to that. So, um, can you talk about how some of these strategies that you have would apply to businesses in particular?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of funny. Um, I thought I had a really good analogy on this, and then I actually busted up my own analogy. I always kind of equated to getting into debt as kind of like gaining weight, right? You
Mm,
don't wait overnight. It takes time. And then
hmm,
the inverse of that is also true, right? If you're 50 pounds overweight and you're trying to lose weight, understand you didn't get that to that point in overnight. So it's going to take time to get out of that. So I think I was like, oh, that's a perfect analogy. I'll apply the same to debt. Here's the crummy part. You can get from zero to hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt just like that. It's not
hmm,
like gaining weight. You can actually do it so quickly, whether you're signing a mortgage, you're signing student loans. I think that is another just, oh, I don't even know. Like, that one gets me fired up. It is such a racket, because you
hmm,
can go from zero in debt to hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt literally in an afternoon.
hmm.
And is that, when we talked about good investment, bad investment? I mean, depending, right? Depending on how you're doing that. But man, that's just a slippery slope. So back to your original question about businesses. Um, understand that, debt can be crippling if it's not
Hmm.
the right way. And then the other aspect that we talked about earlier is start thinking a little bit further down the road, right? Not the immediate, like what do I want my legacy in? And there's so many different books out there. Rocket Fuel is a really good one that talks about, we start from 10 years out, then we move to 5, then we move to 3, and then like in our year, what are our blocks or what are our rocks? I mean, there's 1,000 different ways to do this, but kind of reverse engineer, where do I want to be and what decisions do I need to make right now financially or with my clientele or with my associates, whatever the case is. Reverse engineer that of how am I going to get there and what sacrifices do I need to make financially or whatever. So I think it's getting over this idea of just the here and now. Like understand that it takes a time to build a business, and generational wealth doesn't happen overnight.
You know what word I want to key on that you said so much right there is sacrifice. Yes. And I think that's what plays into debt a lot, is because we're not willing, we're more willing to go into debt than sacrifice something else.
So true.
we want to live up to this lifestyle, right? And we're not willing to sacrifice that part of that lifestyle in order to, we'd rather go in debt. It's crazy to think about that. But yeah, man, I think we do need to do a part 2 because my brain is just just going crazy. But man, I love that you said that word, sacrifice. Oh, let's talk about the mindset again. Long-term vision, right? I think that's another piece of it is we don't need to be short-term business thinkers, right? We need to long-term vision thinkers. And I think this goes back to the covet thing, right? We need to be this is, I'm going to kind of do this as a dating analogy. Oddly enough, early on when we had our little entrepreneur hub and I was just starting my entrepreneur journey, there'd be a few of us entrepreneurs in our condo doing things. And we'd often talk about relationships. This was before I was married. And one of the things that we, I don't even know exactly who brought it up or what it keyed off of, but we need to become the men that would attract the woman that we want. Right.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with money. We need to be prepared. Like if you've seen a lot of people get rich quick and then lose it all, or have a lot of let's call them moral disasters, because they were not equipped. Think about all the pro sports stars that you've heard of make millions and millions of dollars and then lose it all because they were not equipped to handle that money. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we can go down that road. I have often thought that, and maybe it's just something I tell myself because I'm not, I wasn't financially where I wanted to be, but I think that there might be some truth. I'll throw this back to you. I often wonder if some of the blessings that God wants to bestow and wants to give us, he is holding back until we are ready to receive them.
We should pray that he is, actually. The funny thing is we should pray for withholding.
Yes.
That I think a lot of people don't get that. They're like, because we're in this have it now culture, like you would be better off not having that. God is hopefully going to say you'd be better off not having that now. I will give that to you when I feel you are ready. Exactly. And that when you can manage it and you can budget when you know the concept of budgeting. Right? That Andy's gonna teach you that and a lot of other stuff. Oh man.
And the talent. What did Jesus do with the idea of the talents, right? Gave them the one. What did the person with one did? They buried it. Person that had 3, they doubled it. 5 doubled it. So God will bless you in kind to your ability to work and be obedient to how he's given the talents, right?
Exactly. Can we talk about we talked about legacy a little bit. I think it should be in everyone, especially as men, desire to leave something for our children, right? Can we talk about not just from a financial standpoint, but I think it's the what we teach our children. Right. So transforming, like, so they're not living paycheck to paycheck. How do we create that generational wealth mindset?
Oh man, that's a tough one. I have 2 boys, just as a background here. I've got 2 boys in high school. One's about to graduate and the other one's a sophomore. So I am, it's one of those things, I'm not sure if you've ever been there, Doug, where it's like, man, I wish I would have taught that earlier, or man, I wish I would, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm sure as dads, we always do that. It's like hindsight's 2020. So, with my older son being ready to kind of go off into the world and do what he's going to do, I start rethinking of like, okay, have I laid the groundwork? Have I what is the word? Impressed upon him the importance of giving every dollar a job, not spending more than you're making. I mean, sacrificing now so you can have what you want later down the road. The power of compound interest. I mean, there's so many things, and I realize that I'm talking mainly about financial things. More important than that is that they have a personal relationship with Jesus. Like if they have that, then everything else will come into play. But back to the finance aspect, or just being a good person, a legacy, right? I mean, I had a business coach a while ago talk about writing your own eulogy, and that's a tough one, right? I mean, if you really think about, like, hopefully 40 years down the road, we're going to live a long time, right? What do you want to be remembered for, right? What do you want your kids to remember about you, your grandkids, your coworkers, your people that you work for? That's a pretty powerful place to just operate in, right? If you kind of can operate from that position of, like, by the decisions that I make today, how I treat people, what I impress on, how I, what I'm saying, like all of those things. If that is what I want to be remembered for, then, continue on that path. If not, check yourself and let's realign this to what really matters, right? It's not necessarily profitability at every second. It's like, how can we be a good person and put good things out into the world, give lessons that matter to our kids, that are going to last, well past when they're in our house. So, kind of a rambly answer, but those are my thoughts.
No, it was good. And one thing that comes to mind is I have this picture in my head of the way that I would want my remembrance, if you will. Like, it's one thing you hear about, like, there's people that have probably made a lot of money in their lifetimes, and there's like 2 or 3 people at their funeral. Because their priorities are way off.
Right.
And maybe even one of those persons doesn't want to be there, but they were dragged there. I'd rather have a ton of people that have come to my funeral because of the way that I impacted their life, no matter how it was, right? Because I was a good man, not because I had a lot of money. Right. So yeah, that I think if you can strive to anything, when you talk about this again, end in mind eulogy, strive to be that good man that people will remember, not for your things and your assets. And yes, we'd love to have those things, but most importantly is that we are good, that we're followers of Jesus and modeling him.
Yep. Well, and speaking of legacy, and this is, again, maybe this is just something that's on my heart, but I feel compelled to share it, is the idea of whatever it is that you're doing, right? I mean, I forget, again, we've identified, I'm terrible with scriptures, but I know what it says, just not where it's from. Do everything, for the glory of God, right? Whether we're working, whether we're serving, whatever the case is, do it for the glory of God. And again, this is why I'm so excited about this new venture that I'm in, of helping people with debt and wealth and that kind of stuff, because that's something that I feel like, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, conversations that I have with people now could literally set the course of their family in a brighter spot, in a out of freedom, or I'm sorry, out of bondage into freedom, where they are able to travel, they're able to pay for, their vacations or their education. It's just that feels like really, really meaningful work. So that's just my calling. Whatever it is that you guys are doing, or those that are listening, find that thing that you feel like what you're doing is making a lasting, significant difference in the people you work with, your colleagues. Anyways, that's just something that I'm very excited about, because I've kind of fallen away from that aspect of things, and then this new calling on my life just feels like I'm in the spot that God wants me to be, to make a significant difference in people's lives and use my talents for His good. That's what I'm going for.
Sounds like you are being obedient to God's calling. We're all striving to be more obedient. Unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, and we're never going to be completely free of sin. But just strive a little bit more every day to be more like Him. And it is all good. Speaking of obedience, have either in your life or in someone else's life that you've noticed, maybe a client or something, have you seen a difference when they step out in obedience and start to steward their finances wisely?
Absolutely. So I'll speak personally, and then about a client. I look back on, I've been married it'll be 21 years this summer, to my beautiful wife. And I look through all of the ups and downs that we've had over those 21 years, and some very prosperous months and some many lean months, right? Many lean months starting out as a teacher. But that transition between teacher into technology, there was about a year or so where I stepped away from having a guaranteed paycheck, healthcare, all of this stuff, into a completely commission-based role. And I literally, outside of the grace of God, have no idea how we survived on a few of those months where it was like there was no commission whatsoever. Like, how are we going to pay for our mortgage? How are we going to pay for our food? We had a little, actually, it was before our boys, but so maybe that's why kids are expensive. I mean, it shocks me as to how God got us through that. And anyways, back to your question, the faithfulness of God. If you will be obedient with your finances, specifically, I think this is the only one, you can correct me if I'm wrong. God says, test me, right? If you honor God with your finances, you give your 10% before you do anything else. You don't scrimp. You don't say 8% or 7%. You know what I'm saying? 10%. And then whatever God and the Holy Spirit calls on your life to do above and but beyond that. I am living proof that even through those very, very lean months, if you are faithful to God, he will be faithful to you and see you through those months. So I'm definitely living proof of that.
Wow. A similar story to yours. Our family was struggling. That was in the beginning of my entrepreneur journey. My wife was employee number one at her company.
Okay.
And our car was towed. And up to that point, we were not tithing or even tithing sufficiently.
Right.
And God put it on both of our hearts to say, it is not yours, it's mine. You need to get that through your head. And once you realize that, so we started tithing, even when we didn't have, we gave money we didn't have to tithe.
Right. Yep. I know that feeling.
It's either we're going to pay this bill or we're going to tithe. We're going to tithe.
That's rough.
And it's like a line in this, like after, like once we started doing that, everything started to change. And I know some people out there are like, you're just trying, I'm not here. I'm not a church. I'm not asking you for your money. So sometimes when people hear that from the pastor, they're like, their church just wants my money.
Sure.
Andy's living proof. I'm living proof. Once you start realizing that it all comes from him, and you start giving God, again, it may not be the riches and the castle that you think it is, that God's going to provide. You won't have to worry about that next bill because God will make sure that it's taken care of somehow, some way.
Yep.
I recently had a conversation with somebody that was in a lot of credit card debt. And they started to really pray about it. And I don't know the background of it, but somehow their credit card debt was completely erased.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was like,
God's math does not equal human.
That's right. So, it's just been amazing. So just test him, as he says, test God, start to give your 10%. And my story is it worked out. Andy's story is it worked out.
Right.
So,
right.
My confidence is yes.
I'd love to give like a client aspect of this.
Yes.
I met with a lovely couple, Christian couple in their 60s, just bought a house. So do the math, right? And it was not, I think it was a 30 or maybe it was a 20, but I'm pretty sure it was a 30. And one of my first conversations with him is like, what's your retirement plan? He's like, not die. I'm like, oh gosh, terrible plan. Let's see if we can do something about that. So in the conversation and going through running their numbers and kind of having, just some real, kind of some difficult conversations about what would this look like. We were able to go from a 30-year plan, which again would put them in their 90s, down to paying it off in less than 7 years. All of their debt that include their house, their cars. I think they had some student loans for their grandkids, which I did not know was a thing. That is a huge thing in America right now. That grandparents are taking out student loans for their kids or their grandkids, which is lovely. But then they're dying with all of this debt. So that is such an epidemic that we're facing at this point. And if there's a proven way, a mathematical way that we can do that in a faster route where we put more money back in your pockets and we give you some time freedom back, it seems like that's worth a conversation to have. So,
yeah. Wow. So, thank you, Andy. This has been amazing.
You
I do have. So, where can people find out more about what you do and how you can help them?
You bet. So I'm working on getting a website together for you right now. I do have a Facebook page and a YouTube page. So YouTube, so you can scan that link tree. I'm pretty sure we can put links in the things on the backside. Is that
Mm-hmm.
correct? Yep.
Yep, they'll
Good.
be in the show notes wherever you're
Perfect.
watching this video. There'll be the links to get in contact.
Exactly. So there's really kind of three different ways. The Facebook page, which is kind of an ever growing a community of folks that we are just trying to again, it starts with financial literacy. Like, do we know about what's the best way to handle our money? What are some different ways to pay down debt? Different things like that. The YouTube page, which has a lot of different things. Every time I get inspired or whatever, I try to come up with a cool video to kind of show out there. One of the ones that I would recommend checking out is the financial GPS. I've got a video that my VA helped me put together, and it likens treating your finances like an old map or a GPS. And those are literally your options. Do we listen to old outdated strategies that we, do an extra payment when we think about it? Or do we shift over into a more mathematical, technological way that is doing this as efficiently as possible? It does not take into the affect the emotions of things or forgetting and that kind of stuff. It just says, hey, now would be a great time to transfer this money to pay this debt down, or to earn some interest as well. That's another little banking strategy that I'll give you for free. If your money is sitting idle, you are losing money, right? If you are not in interest savings or something like that, you are losing money by putting it in savings. Just a little bit of a shocker there, but there you go.
One thing that comes to mind, I think this relates to something else, but made me think the math doesn't care about your feelings.
Yes, so true. So true. Yep.
The math just makes sense. It's true.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
very true.
Except some of this math they might be teaching in school nowadays. I don't know.
Yeah.
The good old school math makes sense. All right. Well, thank you again, Andy. I do ask one last question of every entrepreneur that comes on this show because I don't want to leave any stone unturned. Do you have any parting words of wisdom for anyone watching?
I would say, again, whether that's me or whether that's somebody that you know and trust, swallow some pride, I guess, is that's probably not a very PC way to say it, but swallow some pride. Like, if you are in a spot where you have a bunch of debt, do something about that. Again, whether that's talking to me or somebody else that you trust. That's another thing that I've found is like, don't emulate or don't follow people that you don't want to be in their shoes, right? If they're in a good spot, then that would be a good person to talk to. Someone that's drowning in debt and not paying their bills, probably not the best person to take financial advice from, right? So I do have a free Empower Wealth Solutions is the name of my company. We do a game plan, and it's just a free 15 to 30 minute conversation, no expectations, just like, hey, where are you at? What's going on? Let's figure out where you're at in your GPS. Where do you want to go? And if there's a way that we can get you there faster, then I would love to, I would be honored really to partner with you to help you do that. But if it's not me, find somebody else, because there are ways to get out of debt faster than what the bank is telling you, because again, it's not in their best interest for you to get out of debt faster. So find somebody that is looking out for you, and let's figure out a way to get you out of debt.
I love that. And one of the things that we talk about as a company and in instructing business owners is to lead with value. And that's what Andy is doing right there. Like, if you want, he talked about knowing, liking, and trusting someone. He's given you an option to meet with him so that you can evaluate whether you know, like, and trust him. And he can give you some value before you've even done any ongoing work with him. So that's awesome.
Yep. I actually, so that idea of the know, like, trust, I was on a training a while ago that the individual added care. So know, like, trust, and care. And it was shocking because there's numbers in it. If you have all four of those, it's like a 99% chance that they're going to do business with you. You drop one of those, it's down to 60%. You drop another one, it's 40%. If you are, if someone is pitching you that you don't know, that you don't really like, you don't trust them, and you know the fact that they don't care about you, why would we do business with them, right? So I think that adding the aspect of caring about them, and again, I'm speaking from my heart, whether you're talking to me or somebody else, find somebody that can help you get out of debt, because there is life, there's freedom not being in debt to the lender.
Yeah, anybody that's feeling debt right now, knows what it feels like it's there. It controls so much of your life.
Right.
Controls the decisions you make and the things you can or cannot do.
Exactly
So,
right. Right.
So please reach out to Andy. All the links are either in that link tree if you're watching this video, or if you're if you're listening to this on audio, they'll be in the show notes. So make sure that you reach out to Andy and at least there's nothing lost from having a conversation with Andy.
Exactly right.
A lot much to be gained.
Yep.
All
You
right.
bet. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much. And
You
until
guys.
next time, entrepreneurs, keep moving forward. All right. Thanks for checking out the Profitable Christian Business Podcast. Remember to like, subscribe, and share.